Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Amanda and my husband Jake and I are challenging ourselves to grow everything our family of 13 eats in just a quarter acre this year. So we're gonna see if we can pull it off. This week, it is the last week of January and I have to get the garden plan done so I can order seeds. So I'm gonna take you along with me as promised and show you my garden planning process. Now we have been doing this for quite some time and the way I plan a garden now looks a lot different than I did the first couple of years. Back when we first started gardening, we were not really getting that much to show for all the work we were putting into our garden, and I started taking professional courses to learn how to grow because I wanted to do a CSA where we sold produce from our garden to families every week, which we did end up doing. And in doing that and taking a course on how to grow cut flowers for bouquets, I realized that all of these gardeners that were growing for production, either to sell flowers or to sell produce, they planned backwards. So they started with what they wanted to have as a product to sell, and then they worked their way back to figure out how much to plant and when to seed start and when to plant and everything else. And it dawned on me that I should be doing the same thing for preserving food. So if I wanted X amount of food in our cold storage room and our pantry to eat all winter long, then I needed to start with what I wanted to end up with and then plan backwards from that to figure out what to grow and when to plant and all of those things. So that was a huge game changer for me. That was about 6 years ago now. I now have that complete planning system in our gardening and food preservation course. It's a 40-page little booklet that walks our class members through step-by-step how to plan a garden with food preservation in mind, and it has video tutorials to go with it. So at this point, I'm going to show you what it looks like once you put that in place. Then it makes garden planning much, much simpler in the years to come, and you can really build on that foundation of a plan and make your garden produce more and more for you every year because you can fine-tune what you grow. So I want to show you now what that planning system looks like today and how I can make the job of planning much, much simpler, especially today because I have to cut down from what we have typically grown, which is 40 beds that are 30-inch wide and 70 foot long. In the quarter acre garden that we're going to be growing in, we figured out that we can get 18 beds in that are 30 inches wide and 65 feet long. So I have less than half of what I normally do to grow in. It is definitely going to be a challenge. I'm going to have to make a lot of cuts in order to fit everything that we need into this quarter acre garden. So I always do my garden planning first and then I do the seed shopping. The seed shopping is the reward that I get to do when I get the work done. And I actually really like planning, so it's not as much of a chore to me as it probably is to other people. But even still, seed shopping is the fun part. So I hold out and I make myself get the plan done, and that way I'm doing it in the right order. So I want to show you what I'm working with so you can see how once you get a preservation plan in place, it makes your life so much easier in the years to come. So I have a preservation checklist that I go off of every year and I add to it and fine tune it. Basically, what I do for my brain, instead of just having 54 quarts of pesto, which I realize is a ton of pesto, but we literally eat pesto like multiple times a week. So we go through a lot of pesto. So not only do I have a box here that says 54 quarts pesto, I also have 9 boxes that say 6 quarts pesto. And I did that because I typically preserve 6 quarts of pesto at a time. So every time I do a batch of pesto, I do a check mark, and then I can keep track of how much I've done and how much I have left to do. And then when I get them all done, I check the box that says 54 quarts and I know, okay, now pesto is done for the season. So by listing it out this way, it just helps me. So I'm not trying to keep track of like how many have I preserved so far. Same thing with like tomato sauce and anything else that I do in batches. I have that system so that I can check it off. If it's something that I do all at once, like corn, for example, then I just have the amount of corn that we have from last year. And then I can go in this time of year, I can typically tell how fast we're eating through things. And so I can think, okay, we have flown through the corn. We need to do 50% more or 100% more or whatever else. Or I can say, okay, we haven't even touched the apple pie filling and we really aren't eating it like I thought we would. So next year I'm not going to make any, or I'm going to cut it in half or whatever else. So this is the time of year that I first go through this preservation checklist and make notes to see what I need to change for the upcoming year before I figure out how much to grow. So then it tells me if I want to double our corn, for example, I need to grow 2 times as much corn. So I have a garden plan from last year. This is my garden plan. And I have a kind of a master chart where I have everything every category I grew, so corn, and I have how much I grew. So if I want twice as much to preserve of corn, then I go to this chart and I write and make a note that I need to double the amount of corn that I'm going to grow this year. And sometimes what happens too is we actually don't eat nearly as much green beans as I want to think that we do. So year after year, I preserve way more green beans than we actually eat. We have too many left over and we end up feeding a bunch to the chickens. So this year I made a note that I actually need to decrease our green beans by half. And I'm also cutting out a whole bunch of varieties. I'm pretty much only going to grow 1 variety, which I'll get to in a different YouTube video. I'm going to share all of my top favorite varieties that I grow for production and flavor and winter storage. So I'll get to that in a minute. But for the sake of this example, I'm basically just wasting a lot of space on green beans that are stringy and gross and that we don't actually like to eat. So I have experimented and instead of continuing to just grow green beans that we don't like, I'm just going to grow the 1 variety that we love and we eat a ton of, and I'm going to grow less of it than I would have grown if I had all the other green beans. So typically I grow somewhere around 60 green bean plants. This year I'm only going to do 20 of the one that we like because that's really all I end up harvesting anyway. So it's going to save me a ton of space in the garden. So by going through this list, I've already been able to cut down a lot. The other thing I do with this chart is I went through and starred all of the crops that are like our storage crops. These are the crops that we're actually going to preserve and eat all winter long. Those get first priority. Anything like summer squash or pumpkins or melons or popcorn that isn't an essential crop that we're going to eat all year long, that is going to be the first to go. So I cut out all of the flowers also and the non-essential crops. And now I'm down to the essential storage crops, which are onion, carrots, beets, arugula, and basil for our pesto, and then cilantro, which we put into all of our salsas and stuff, lettuce for fresh eating through the summer, and then green beans and dry beans. We grow all of our own dry beans, and so I don't want to give up on that. I think I have room for it in the garden this year. And then peas, shelling peas, snap peas, okra, peppers, corn, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, eggplant, celery, tomatoes, so determinate tomatoes, indeterminate tomatoes, and tomatillos, and then potatoes, sweet potatoes, zucchini, some winter squash like butternut squash and spaghetti squash, and then if we can squeeze it in, loofahs, and I also would really like to grow pumpkins. So we actually have the 1/4 acre plot right out this window. And when Jake was talking about it in the planning session, he was saying that we should do corn along the fence right next to the rabbits because that's going to be like a little spot we could plant something. So this window in our shop kitchen overlooks the 1/4 acre garden that used to be our flower garden. Our house kitchen overlooks our market garden where we typically grow everything. And so both kitchens overlook gardens, and I absolutely love that. And the last thing I want to do is plant a row of corn right along the fence so that I can't see anything else in the garden. So I'm actually going to do corn in the garden, and I'm going to do something low to the ground. I'm probably going to do pumpkins in the spot that Jake said we should grow something, because then they can just take over that space. They're not going to choke out anything else, and it's a way to utilize the space. And we actually, though pumpkins seem like a waste, we're not growing them to carve them for Halloween. We grow them because they store almost the entire winter. We can keep pumpkins at room temperature until about March. So they last forever, and we actually feed them to our worms all winter long, and we've had them as backup to feed pigs in case we were to run out of feed or anything. But We feed them to the pigs, but we mostly feed them to the worms, and it's a great way to build a lot of compost in the worm bins very, very quickly. The worms love pumpkins. So we're probably still going to try and fit pumpkins in because they don't seem essential, but they are actually fairly essential to what we do. All right, so that's kind of the general plan of what I'm going to grow. So again, I've been going back and forth between the preservation list and my list from last year. The other thing that I do with my garden plan that I want to share with you is I have this, it's going to look crazy, but this is my plan. It's 4 pages long for the market garden. And for every row, so this one up here is the tomatoes. I have each of the tomato varieties I grew, how many of them I planted, and then I have how many of them lived. So for the tomatoes, they pretty much have a 100% success rate. But for some plants like dry beans and green beans and stuff, you end up not getting as good of a germination. So I go through and I actually count every plant in the garden. So I keep track of how many I planted, and then I keep track of how many actually germinated, so what my germination rate is. And then from there I can figure out, okay, is this something that has a really poor germination rate? Like for example, cannellini beans are really expensive to buy from the store because they have really poor germination rates and the plants don't give that much. But it's one of the most nutrient-dense dry beans you can grow. So I'm not willing to forfeit growing cannellini beans because 1, I want to actually save money and grow them myself. And 2, they're so good for us, we need to have them. So because I know they have about a 50% germination rate, what I'm now doing, what this chart tells me, is that I need to double plant the holes rather than losing about half of the bed to poor germination. So by keeping all the records, I can see exactly what's going on, and it really helps me to really fine-tune my planting to make sure that I am nailing how much we need for our family. And I am maximizing our garden space. By doing it this way, I can make sure that I am like using every square inch of the garden possible, and I'm not wasting space. So the other thing I do is I keep track of what I seed save. So anything I seed save, I circle, and then once I get it seed saved, I highlight it so I can go back and see, okay, what do I have seed for? What do I need to buy seed for? And every year, you know, these notes are like out in the garden. I have them in a bin out in the garden so I can keep taking notes all season long. And then come this time of year, having these 3 sets of notes just makes my life so much simpler, and it allows me to keep improving my plan year after year so that I can really fine-tune the garden. So now that I've prioritized what I want to grow, I have 17 beds. I ended up having to do some hard cuts. I'm not going to be able to grow any flowers in the market garden, and besides marigolds, which I just do for pest control. But I was able to fit everything that we need for preserving into the quarter-acre garden. So I have 17 rows filled out. I have the space along the fence filled out, and I have 1 extra row to play with. I always actually like to have 1 row that I don't have planned because inevitably I come across something that I really want to try, or I realize I forgot something, or I want to plant a little extra of something, whatever. It just gives me a little bit of wiggle room, and for whatever reason, mentally, it helps me to just feel like there's still a little space for something if I have some kind of crazy whim mid-spring. So I now have a master list of everything I am going to grow, and the next step is to figure out what varieties I'm going to grow. So this is a lot easier than it used to be because for almost every crop we have like a very top favorite variety that we love and don't want to live without, which I'm going to share in a different video. And so at this point, basically what I do is I plant about 75% of the crop with the variety we know that we love, and then I leave 25% up for trying something new. So then, for example, with sweet corn, we have this sweet corn variety called Essence F1 from Johnny's that is like so phenomenal. We have so many people come through our garden every year and try it, and everybody wants to make sure they have the name of it because it is the best sweet corn you've ever had in your life. And every year I grow a different variety next to it to see if I can find something to beat it, and we have yet to beat that variety. And so every year we do a taste test side by side, like taste them both, and then we all vote as a family, and whatever variety gets the most votes wins, unless I have a very strong opinion that's different than the family's, and then in that case, I win. My vote trumps all because I'm the one gardening and ordering the seeds. So, you know, at the end of the day, they get a say, but they don't get a say. You know what I mean? But the system has worked really well for us, and now we have a lot of varieties worked out that store really well. For example, we have like Bolero carrots are the ones that do the very best in our cold storage room. So I always grow the majority of those because I know they're gonna last in storage, whereas I don't know what anything else will do. On that note, I know that you're not asking, but I do want to share an unsolicited piece of advice here. If you are a brand new gardener or you have been gardening for years, but you are having a hard time having success with things like carrots or peppers or whatever else, variety plays a huge role in your success in gardening. So I have probably grown maybe 20 different varieties of carrots, and 5 of them do really, really well in my garden. If I hadn't tried a bunch of different varieties of carrots, I wouldn't know that I'm actually really good at growing carrots. They just have to be the right variety for my climate and like the soil that I'm growing in. So if you're new to gardening, or like I said, you have some experience but you've been having a hard time, throw out the varieties that you've been trying to grow unsuccessfully and try new ones. And instead of just planting one variety of carrot, invest in like 5 to 6 varieties and plant an equal amount of each and just see how they grow side by side. Chances are 1 or 2 of them are going to do great and the rest of them are going to kind of be a flop. And then you know going forward, okay, I know I can at least grow these ones in my garden, and then you can do the same thing I do where you grow 75% something that you know is going to grow well, and then 25% is something new that you can keep trying to find something even better than what you're already growing. It's a really great way to make sure that your garden is producing as much as possible for you. And I see so many people get stuck in the rut of just replanting the seed that they have because they've already bought it and they're trying to save money, and it's not really saving you money if it doesn't grow in your garden. You're actually just wasting time and energy, and you're not getting anything for it. So it's something I stress to our garden course members all the time, like invest in different varieties and find what works for your garden, and then stick to the tried and true. But if you're not having success, don't keep planting the same thing and expecting different results. All right, so that's about as far as I can get to this point. Now it's time to go do some seed shopping, and I'm gonna then make a master list of each crop. So say it's corn, I'm gonna write down what varieties of corn I'm gonna grow and how much. This is most important actually for all of the crops I'm gonna seed start, so like peppers and tomatoes and things like that. I need to know exactly how many varieties I want to end up with in the garden so that I can know how many I need to seed start inside. And I always seed start about 20 to 30% more than what I think I'm going to plant so that I have room for error and for poor germination and whatever else. So I need to have that all into place because it's about time to start seed starting. I only have like another week or 2, which means I also need to get my grow room cleaned out. So that's the last week of January. In the next video, I'm going to share with you all of my must-have, can't live without seed varieties. So make sure that you look for that one.